Welcome to the I Saved You, Now Do the Dishes podcast. I'm author and speaker Carrie Severson. In each episode, I'll share stories and tips from my experience with caregiving and advocacy through my husband's cancer journey. Let's get into it. Hi, and welcome back to I Saved You, Now Do the Dishes podcast. I'm your host, Carrie Severson. In last week's episode, I talked to you about how my husband really advocated for himself. He got a voicemail saying that he had cancer. His biopsy came back malignant and he needed to get on it and call an ENT, but he couldn't get a hold of the ENT. So he took his pathology report, and he walked into an ER and he said, I have a little bit of cancer and I want someone to take a picture of it. He had a CT scan in the ER, which was actually quite hard to get because it wasn't an emergency. He wasn't referred. This was something he was advocating for. And we found out it was malignant. We found out it had metastasized. It was on his lymph nodes and on his tonsil. And we had to go home to wait. The ENT had called us back, got him on the calendar, but not for several weeks. And knowing you have metastasized cancer, but you don't have an action plan, and watching your loved one spin is agonizing. I mean, it was really hard. And all I could do was sit there and watch him. What do you need? How can I support you? And knowing what I know now, we should have gone back to an ER, offered to pay cash for a PET scan just to get an image of where the cancer was. But we didn't even know that. This was the first time that we had ever experienced something like that. So my husband called the hospital that he had gone to the ER. He had gone to an ER a couple days before. He called and he was like, I want an appointment with the head and neck surgeon. I'll pay cash. We don't have a referral. I want to see this guy. And we got an appointment. He had offered to pay cash. It was like $400. It was a 15-minute consult. And that happened a couple of days later. And we were so excited. We were like, oh my gosh, finally, getting further in this process. By that point, my husband had the thing on his neck was so big that you could grab it. It was massive. It was like the size of my palm, and you could pick it up. So we go to this meeting, the head and neck surgeon. The guy walks in, and all he had at that point was Gavin's CT scan and a biopsy and an ultrasound. And the guy's like, well, I don't know if I'm the right person for you. So Gavin's like, I just want somebody to cut this out of me. Can't you just pop it out? And the guy's like, first of all, hold your horses. No, that's not how this works. And then the guy's like, your case is kind of complicated. And Gavin stops him and he's like, I don't want to know the stage of it. Unless you're telling me I'm going to die right now, don't tell me the stage. And this is my tip for you advocates, for you caregivers. This was the smartest thing anyone has said to me in the healthcare profession in this journey of cancer and caregiving. The head and neck surgeon said, I recommend patients don't learn the stage of it because putting a number simplifies a very complicated situation. And if I tell you you have stage 1 or 2, you're going to walk out here and think very differently about yourself, about your life, about your condition, about what you're about to face than you would if I told you you had 3 or even 4. So the guy says, I think it's really smart not to know the stage. And I'm dying inside. I want to know the stage. But for the sake of my marriage and my mental health and his mental health, we decided not to do it. But he did say, this case is very complicated and it's urgent. And then he goes into telling Gavin that while he appreciates the fact that Gavin just wants surgery, Gavin was adamant in the beginning he didn't want chemo or radiation because sadly we had just lost his stepmom to pancreatic cancer literally weeks before he was diagnosed. It was kind of a mess. It was a lot going on. And, Gavin's like, if chemo and radiation were healthy for you, doctors would recommend it for a healthy person. He's like, I don't want to put more poison in my body. But the head and neck surgeon was like, so unfortunately, you have tumor clusters. And it looked like a grapevine all throughout, going down his neck and his lymph nodes. And he's like, everything is pressing up against the jugular vein. And unfortunately, that sits on the carotid. I can't snip those. If I do, there's very complicated situations that could happen for you. You would lose your ability to use your tongue. You couldn't raise your arms. All sorts of things would happen. He's like, I'm not sure I can cut this out of you. He's like, but I am going to request that you go downstairs. You ask the receptionist to schedule you for a workaround PET scan. So here's my next tip. The term workaround is used in the medical profession, meaning it's appointments that are saved for urgent cases. You're coming in before the place opens. You're coming in after the place is officially closed. You might even come in on the weekend. So we did ask for a workaround PET scan. And he got in a few days later, was the first available. I want to say it was like at 7:45 in the morning. And Gavin couldn't look at the pictures. He asked me not to look at the pictures, but I had to. So he's off doing something, and I would log into his portal, and I would look through thousands and thousands and thousands of images until I saw ones that were mostly green. And they were huge. The tumors were gigantic. And by the time he had a PET scan, they had jump sides. So they were running all along the right side of his neck. And then there was one over on a tumor on the left side of his neck as well. It was a very complicated situation, like the guy said. It was very urgent that he get seen soon. So he and I made an agreement in the beginning. Here's my next tip for you. We're going to go with the network where it feels like we're in the least resistance. Where can you get seen first? What network is going to move fastest? If you have a little nest egg, offer to pay cash, get some tests done so you can see what you're dealing with up front. Take those results to a team. Advocate for yourself. Push harder. Demand to be seen. And wherever you have the least resistance is where you should go. Because today, a lot of these hospital networks have the same kind of treatment plan. And we called around. We asked for recommendations for treatment plan based on what we had in terms of his tests and scans and stuff. And everyone was the same. So we saw a chemotherapist, we saw a radiologist, and we were told Gavin would be scheduled for 35 radiation fractions and 7 chemotherapy sessions. He hated it. He was like, I really want someone to just cut this out of me. It took a while. There was a lot of arguments. There was a lot of conversations about, should he do this naturally? Should he do this? And, he would go off and he would research what other countries were doing for cancer. And we ordered tons and tons and tons of things like turmeric, and France has pills, medicine that the United States uses for dog worms, treating dogs for worms. And for, days on end, we had boxes and boxes of stuff showing up while we waited for his next test. It's a very hard process. The beginning it feels like years of just pulling everything together, of getting a plan together, getting your team together, just so that you could start treatment. It was incredibly challenging. So I did what I could, and I coped the best I could, and I try to control it, which is my next tip for you. This one's filled with tips. You can't control this freight train. You can try, but it won't work. But I try to control it. I bought a whiteboard. I bought chemo port shirts. That is a tip I have. That is a great tip, actually. Chemo port shirts. They button like a V, and so you can zip them or unbutton so that the chemotherapist, the nurse that's going to give you chemo, can get to your port easily. It is kind of weird when, like, you know, the chemo floor shown in movies and things looks relaxing and fun, and women are, like, you know, hanging out with popsicles and talking to their girlfriends, but in real life it was like cubicles and very loud, very overstimulating, and a lot of people with their shirts off. And so I bought Gavin a lot of chemo port shirts. I try to control it by, you know, scheduling things like date nights and how we're going to stay connected as a couple. And we even planned to go up to Sedona for a getaway. And we thought in the beginning, him being out in nature would be the best possible thing. The thought process you have, or that we had before it started, was very different than the thought process we had during it. We were naive in the beginning as to how hard it would be. And we just had to bend and be flexible. And that was really hard for me. So the PET scan comes, and was by far the worst day of our experience up to that point. Unfortunately, our dog, Princess Leia, had gotten really sick, and he was getting shot up with radiation while I was laying on the floor of the vet's office putting our dog to sleep. It was awful. I mean, it was a nightmare. And I saw the beauty in her release because of the timing of it. And I assumed God called her home because I was about to embark on something so heavy I wouldn't be able to take care of her and him. So I called Gavin. He's just about to go into the machine, and I'm like, this is what the vet recommends. And as soon as it was done, I laid on the floor with her for a little while, and then somehow got to the hospital. And I pulled into the parking lot right next to Gavin. I don't remember driving. And he's crying in his car. I'm crying in mine. I climb into his, and we just sat there for a while and cried. And then we were both like, we need a cocktail. This day, you know what sucks. So we go to this like hipster bar in Phoenix. We're the only two people there. And we're bawling in the corner. And my husband has cancer. My dog just died. We're drinking cocktails in the middle of the afternoon. It was the worst day. We go home, and, you know, everyone's asking about results, and I just posted on Caring Bridge, another tip. It's a great site. It's a great platform. This is what happened today. We're not looking at results. We'll do it another day. We've had enough bad news for the day. But the next day is when I looked at his results and I saw the tumor clusters. You can only do what you can do. You can only control what you can control. And we definitely didn't feel like we were in control of anything at that point. It was pretty harsh. Christmas comes, feels very weird, right? I'm like in a total fog. And my husband is approaching it like it's going to be his last, which was weird to watch him pour so much love and attention into his kids and into me, because in the event it was his last. You know, it was obviously in the back of my mind too. And after Christmas, we both got COVID. It was really hard. It was a very hard season to sort of like start. We hadn't even started his treatment yet. Our dog died. We both got COVID. And finally, January 2024 comes. He gets fitted for his radiation helmet. And the helmet, in case you've never seen one of these things, it's not like Darth Vader. It's Darth Vader with holes. And so it come from the top of his head all the way down over his shoulder blades, pins him to this board, and it molds to his face, right? And then the radiation mapping session is when he sits in there for another 45 minutes and they map out where each individual radiation laser is going to shoot him up for every single session. And he had 35 sessions they had to map. It was a very intense start. So before he officially started, we finally get a date, January 22nd, 2024. He's going to start. We decide to lay Princess Leia to rest. She loves Sedona. She loved playing up in Sedona. So we decided to take her ashes up there. And my husband's like, I want one full day where we don't talk cancer. And, you know, my intuition is really strong. Something felt wrong about that. We get a phone call. I get a phone call. It's from the radiation department. And he's like, I told you I don't want to talk cancer. I'm like, I'm going to answer this because you have cancer and your hospital's calling. I'm going to answer. And she's like, hey, I just want to let you know that I scheduled him for all his radiation sessions. You'll find it in his portal. And I'm like, great. Can you make me the point person? I'm going to take charge of his calendar and I'll take on responsibility of communication because it's overwhelming for him. For every single appointment scheduled, he would get notified. And if you have 35 appointments with just one department, that's a lot. It's a lot of communication. So I'm like, I'll just take this on for him. And I'm like, okay, so he's scheduled for radiation. How about chemotherapy? And she's like, yeah, that's a different department. I can't help you there. And the way that she said it sat really wrong with me. There was something about it that, okay, like a rock in the pit of my stomach. I'm trying to honor my husband's request of no cancer for 24 hours. I've already broken that. I'm like, okay, thanks. So I hang up the phone. I don't look at him. And he's like, turn your phone off now. Okay. We lay Princess to rest. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, I got to call chemo. There's something there. I know it. I don't get a chance to do anything that day. So the next morning, he's off playing in the creek. He's having fun. He's relaxing. He's enjoying himself. I turn my phone on and I call as many numbers as I can into the hospital network until I find somebody that can help me understand why the chemotherapy department has not called to schedule him. He's supposed to start in 2 weeks. Why hasn't anyone called? So I get put on hold. I actually remember the name of the woman I was speaking to. Her name was Carrie, just like me. And she's like, okay, Carrie, well, I have an answer for you. I'm sorry to tell you that the original doctor you met with doesn't have room on his calendar anymore, and Gavin's been bumped. So he doesn't start now until February 15th. And I was like, no. Miss Carrie, I understand. You're doing your job here. But I will find a way to take my husband and his account, which is a ton of money to you, and I will find a way to take him somewhere else. He starts January 22nd. You make sure of it. And she's like, I understand. I will call you back. My husband walks in as I'm closing that conversation up. My dog's down here. He just made a noise. And he's like, do I want to know what just happened? And I'm like, nope. I walk outside. I'm fuming. I'm so mad. If he would have been bumped a whole other month, by that point, his cancer had quadrupled. It had metastasized. It was running rampant in his body. Another month, who knows where it could have gone, you know? No. Nope. I don't care. I told her this. I was like, I don't care who hooks him up to the chemotherapy machines and the drugs. He's on your calendar starting January 22nd. So about 20 minutes later, this woman calls me back and she's like, guess what? I found somebody. I'm like, I bet you did. You know what I mean? Like, here's the thing is that, like, unfortunately, healthcare is a corporation. They need to be paid. And cancer is a ton of money. Getting cured from cancer is a shit ton of money. I'm sorry to say this, but like taking an account away like that would have been a lot of money. I'm not surprised they found somebody. So he did officially start treatment January 22nd, 2024. And it wasn't easy. In next week's episode, I'll share my tips on how I managed as his caregiver moving into this process and some of the struggles that we really faced. Please remember, if you are a caregiver, I love you. You got to take care of yourself. And it is okay to ask somebody else to do the dishes. Until next time.